Welcome to the Great Reset with Goodwill Hinton. I am joined tonight by my friends from Footie Mob. I'm joined by Curtis Jenkins, McKie, and Terri Harrington. How was everybody?
Good.
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 Awesome. So tonight's discussion, I'll first preface for those who are not familiar with Footie Mob. Footie Mob is a supporters group for Atlanta United, the soccer team here in Atlanta. And we are all very involved in Footie Mob. And I wanted to take opportunity this week to talk less about soccer and supporters group culture and more about Atlanta. Culturally, there's obviously things going on in Atlanta with protest. And we all have different experiences living in Atlanta. So our conversation tonight is going to be, once again, this idea of this great reset. And, there's these normals that people want to go back to. And so we're going to talk about maybe what had been normal in Atlanta and maybe talk about where Atlanta could go and what would be good progress moving forward. Curtis, you're from Atlanta. Talk to me about, your experience growing up in Atlanta and what Atlanta means to you.
I think I had the fairly normal South Metro suburb Atlanta upbringing. You got to know where you lived. You knew everybody. If you didn't know them, you had a friend or a cousin who knew them. You learned to run the streets and the back streets and, have a good time while not necessarily getting too out of hand. And if it did, there was usually a way you could talk yourself out of it. You knew where to go, where not to go. And it was fairly standard. I guess it was when Atlanta was a big, small town more than what it's grown to be.
Yep. Terri, what about you? You grew up here in Atlanta as well. What did that look like for you?
So I grew up in Decatur, but I was in the unincorporated DeKalb version of Decatur, like over towards Covington Highway and Glenwood Road. And so I lived there until I was 13 years old. My grandparents lived in Belvedere Park. So during the day, my mom worked at the Sears building and she would drop me off in Belvedere Park. And I would be there during the day, and then she would take me back and forth to school. Again, I agree with Curtis. At that point, felt very much like a big, small town. Even in my summer vacations, I would hang out with my mom when she started working at the DeKalb courthouse in the square in Decatur when it wasn't like it was now. When we moved to Duluth when I was 13, I went to high school at Duluth. It felt very different from where I grew up. And I appreciated it. I had some good friends there, but for some reason, it never really quite felt like home. So as soon as I graduated high school, I went to Georgia State so I could get back in town again. But I kind of miss what it was like when I was growing up, when it really did feel like you knew your neighbors. Everyone kind of, you could ask them I could ask them on their phone number and I knew where they lived right away from the first three digits.
Yep.
But I think that there's still a need to kind of get back to that. And I kind of feel with the past maybe like 20 years, we're kind of going back to the way it was when I grew up. And I'm hoping to see that trend continue.
Yeah. So Reggie, I think you came here a little later. Tell me about your experience coming to Atlanta and what Atlanta is to you.
I've been here since '88. I came down here for college. And so when I came, I had a different kind of experience. Because I didn't grow up here, I had that college life. And so there was a lot of exploration, a lot of time on MARTA, a lot of time in College Park. Thank God there were no camera phones. So anyway, so I had a different kind of experience. And so I met my wife there. She was at Spelman, I was at Morehouse. And we kind of grew up here as young adults. So we saw the phases from Freaknik to, you just name it, the different phases that Atlanta kind of went through. It was weird to kind of be here at ground zero and just kind of actually watch it unfold. So I guess I have a different kind of perspective, kind of unique because I got to see this as a young adult. So I got to participate in some of the fun things, and I got to see the community because as I grew up here, and we got married and we started a family. We had a church community. We still had the alum community, people who I went to school with who were still here. And then there was a work community. So it's just, you just had different bubbles that you kind of floated in between.
Mm. So I'll tell you guys my experience growing up in Atlanta. I grew up in North DeKalb, and for me, I think the big change was probably in the mid 80s. So my elementary school was probably 95% white, and DeKalb County school system was under a court order to integrate and did the M2M busing program. And so starting in high school, and we didn't have middle schools in DeKalb County. You went straight to the high school in 8th grade.
Yep.
And 8th and 9th grade, I was the only white guy at my lunch table. So it was, it was hard not to see the changes, and you hear about this, white flight. I saw it very directly, and there were people still moving out to Gwinnett. But it was, I wouldn't change that for anything. It was difficult. I think a lot of people, had a hard time with that. I didn't realize for years, and it may not have even been until the past 5 to 10 years, was, just the sacrifice that a lot of my Black friends who lived in South DeKalb, and they were spending an hour or 2, 3 hours every day on the bus. Whereas for me, it was just easy. So yeah, I mean, same sort of thing that I think Terri and Curtis said about just kind of feeling a smaller town. You kind of felt like you knew everybody. And it seemed like it was probably somewhere in the 90s Olympics, things started to change here. So what do you got? So we've had this it seems like this constant boom and growth over the past 20 years or more, 25 years. I'm curious kind of what you guys think, that has looked like and changed the city. What are things like, if you had to describe kind of Atlanta culturally to somebody else, at least over that past 20 years, how would you describe it to an outsider? Curtis, thoughts?
You describe it as truly Atlanta in some ways, because you had the couple between white flight and then other people going to follow that to make better lives for their kids. This sort of vacuum created in Atlanta proper that started getting filled by transplants. And now you're seeing a lot of the people who left their kids coming back into town. So I think the last 5 years has felt more Atlanta than the 15 years before that. I think that's where we are now culturally, is you're seeing the mixing of the traditional historic Atlantans with the somewhat transient transplant community, people who've either come in and left or coming here just to plan to leave. Mm-hmm. And the way you can really describe it right now is that it's in a constant state of flux of figuring it out. What does it actually mean to be from Atlanta? It's not another place, but it seems like that's the way you describe Atlanta. It's like this, but with less of that. There's no precise way to say Atlanta is about this.
Yeah. Well, I like that you talk about kind of what it means to be an Atlantan and people, calling yourself an Atlantan. And there are some places you go. I lived 1 year in Greenville, South Carolina, and I knew that I would never be from Greenville, and people let you know it, whether they were from there or not. And I generally think of Atlanta as kind of different in that if you've chosen to be here, then you're one of us. So I'm wondering how you experience that, Reggie, having not grown up here.
I came here specifically to go to Morehouse. I came here to go to an HBCU because most of my life I was a military kid, and then when I wasn't in the military, went with my father traveling. I was often the only Black kid in the classroom, so I wanted to do something different. I had not grown up in a majority white space. like that. I mean, I had it in school, but then socially, I had my own, I grew up in my neighborhood. So I came here and I said, before anyone was calling it Wakanda, a lot of people still wanted to go to Atlanta. You wanted to see Monica Kaufman because we didn't have that. As soon as you get off a plane in Atlanta and you start walking around, the people who work in the airport, they're Black. Not just the news, the mayor. There were things I just had never seen before until I came here. And so when we graduated and decided to stay here, we got married. That was a deliberate decision. Especially when we started a family, we wanted our kids to grow up in an environment where they saw themselves well represented throughout society. It wasn't unusual for my kids to, like in our church, we had engineers, we had doctors, we had, I think at one time, one of the police, I think it was the police chief, CJ, Sarah, she was actually a member of our church. So it wasn't unusual for them to see not just Black professionals, but just a wide range of Black life. And that was something that was important to me. When I started doing things with Footie Mob, that was a big change for me because I was very secure in my HBCU circle, and so I did a lot of things in my own world. And so most of my interactions, aside from work, were within a very, very African-American experience.
Terri, how about you? What is that, this idea of being an Atlantan, like how has that changed in your mind having grown up here?
Well, I was thinking about a couple of things that for me were different in I've only lived here. I've never lived anywhere else. I didn't go to school anywhere else. Most of my family, my mom's side of the family is in Los Angeles. So if there's another affinity home for me, it would be LA. So you can imagine if it's East LA, so you can imagine it's so much different than here. But when I grew up, I went to a very diverse school. And it was a shock to go to a very white Duluth, very white Gwinnett County. In my school, we had Black, white, we had a bunch of Laotian immigrants. There was actually a pretty strong Laotian community in DeKalb County at the time. And it was very different to go to have a wide variety of a diverse group of friends and then go to Gwinnett County where I felt like I was kind of the oddball. My mother being Mexican, she always joked that she was the first Mexican in Georgia because she moved here in 1970. So it was a bit of a change for me. But it was, like I said, not a bad experience. It just always felt not quite like home. But what I found interesting was that we went to college, and those of us who stayed in Georgia and went to college in Atlanta, we found all these places in town where you could actually live on a college salary. So Midtown used to be all college students. Little 5 Points, you get 5 people in a house, no problem. And you are going to the bars and the clubs and going to see shows and people having house parties and stuff. And when after the Olympics, people started to buy those places that we had for cheap. Like Reggie mentioned Freaknik. Like we always knew Freaknik was coming and we'd have a house party because we knew we weren't going to go anywhere. You couldn't even try to go to work. You'd say, you know what, we're all staying at this house in Midtown. We're going to buy a bunch of pizza, buy a bunch of beer, sit back and just have a good time. Just embrace it because that's what you did. And all those places started to build up. And I kind of felt sad because, anyone that was going out in the 90s, there's actually a Facebook page, Old School Atlanta Musicians, where you go back and you could see all these different bars and places, and people were starting to reconnect because there was a lot of music and a lot of fun things going on then that people were doing on the cheap. But after the Olympics, I couldn't afford to live there anymore. I guarantee the place where I, hung out, where there was like 5 people living in a house with 2 bedrooms, 1 person sleeping in a closet, there was no way that we could afford that now. So I kind of missed that. And there's actually a book, I can't remember the name of the author, called Alternative Atlanta, that focuses on that early 90s sort of like bar, club, band scene that was going on. And then what happened with the Olympics. Because I think if anything is going to mark a big shift from old Atlanta to new Atlanta, was definitely 1996. We were never this, and I love the Olympics. I worked for the Olympics. But nothing was the same after 96.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you must have been doing well to live in Midtown, because I had to move down to East Atlanta with my brother and some friends.
Oh, this was like in 1991 or 92. So
it's fun. My favorite game to play with anyone who's been here long enough, honestly, anybody, is ask them point to a building, go, what used to be there, and see how far back they could go.
Oh, yeah.
And who remembers that what the point is now is a clothing store. It's like, yeah, here's what actually happened there before you bought clothes there.
Which is that's one of the twisted things about Atlanta, is that we tear everything down. You know, I mean, you look back at one point, we almost got rid of the Fox Theater. You know, we had the train station here was one of the most beautiful ones in the world. We tore that down. So,
the Carnegie Library.
Yep. So let's talk, Reggie got into a little bit of Footie Mob. Let's talk specifically about Footie Mob. And, Curtis, you're one of the founders of Footie Mob. And, talk to me about how you started it, what that looked like in your conception at the beginning, and how that has grown from, when it began a few years ago.
So Footie Mob has a weird sort of inauspicious start, in that what you see now is the party that I've gone to, thrown, been associated with almost all my life. And I've been friends with Stefan, who's the other co-founder, for God knows how long. And what was just like kind of a joke between the two of us of like, oh, we should do this. Wouldn't it be funny if now has turned into this? And I mean, kind of learning on the fly, learning through a lot of mistakes that you correct as soon as humanly possible, figuring things out, talking to people, asking the right questions. I mean, it's probably on its 3 billionth iteration of itself from where we started to where it ended up. I mean, we had no concept that people would come along for this ride. So in the very beginning, we're like, oh, let's just make it a fun Twitter account. And then it starts getting followers. And we're like, oh, maybe we'll do this. And it keeps growing. And you sort of have to change your plans on the fly and kind of keep moving with the crowd. You start going, okay, how do we do the next thing? What's after that? And you start talking to people. I would literally just email supporters groups from around the country and say, hey, how do we do this? And a lot actually replied back and were like, hey, make sure you do this, take care of this, you're going to want to handle this. And it's a really cool community. And that's what sort of attracted me to continue to build it, was the fact that it became a community. I knew Terri before Footie Mob. I didn't know Reggie. Now we're all in a room together for the same reason. And the funny thing is, I've obviously knew Terri, but Reggie and I were talking one day, and it turns out we were at the same, like, what was it, Do the Right Thing's 20th anniversary or 25th anniversary at the Fox Theater. And both there, but we didn't know each other at the time. So you're finding people who are already in your circle and giving them, a concentric circle to all be in.
I'm laughing about that because Terri and I think we've pretty much figured out we were at most the same concerts together in the late 80s.
For sure.
But didn't know each other yet.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to remember this. Curtis, you wrote something a while back in Footie Mob on our Facebook group about, part of, some of what you see is happening, in the space that you've tried to create. And I know it's not just you. I know there's a lot of people. But what is that, beyond just, obviously it's a big party and it's a lot of fun. What does that look like to you? Like, what does that space mean to you? And how did that happen?
I mean, personally, I come from a space of sports where I played Little League. The team was all black. I played basketball. The team was all black. Then when I started discovering soccer, it was the reverse of that. I would be the only Black face in the room. There might have been brown faces. There might have been, I mean, it could have been diverse, but I was the only African-American person there. And so you want to create a place because people are naturally curious. You want to create a place where they can come in and join the party. They can dip a toe in the water, see that it's fine, and just sort of get in at their own speed. If you want to come in at 100 miles an hour, great. If you want to come in at 2 miles an hour, great. So I think doing that and having a diverse membership, having a diverse board invites more people in who are at that toe dip stage, or they might be at the 100-mile-an-hour stage, but didn't have anyone to do it with. And I want to present as many different avenues to expose people, to expose communities, and bring them into this space where they're accepted for who they are, where they can find this common thing to sort of bridge the gap to the things they don't have in common, to find a place where you can use the thing that at the end of the day, hierarchy of needs doesn't matter, to talk about the things that do matter. And that's what this space should be. I mean, one of the greatest things about watching the group grow is that we barely have to admin the Facebook group. It self-polices now. And that speaks to the group understanding what we're about, understanding that if you're a member here, that you have been around our members, that you sort of understand, and that you're going to assume the best of the people who are in that room with you, and you can have a discussion from a much better point.
Mm-hmm. Terri, how would you describe kind of the ethos of Footie Mob? Like, what, once again, beyond the soccer, what is Footie Mob to you?
So when I first heard about Footie Mob, actually I was hanging out with Curtis. It's right when Atlanta United was first started going. I was a member of TL, and it was because I knew Curtis and because I knew Stefan, I wanted to help be involved with what they were doing. And I liked the idea of bringing soccer to Atlanta and Atlanta culture to soccer. Like, that to me was very appealing, because, I've been following soccer, I'm a big Fulham supporter, got to get that in there somewhere. And it was nice to have something that I felt I could be a part of. And it was, for this in particular, I mean, we had other teams support. I, still have a big love in my heart for the Silverbacks, but this was something that I knew was going to be bigger and something that would get more of a platform. And having, and always trying to justify or support Atlanta sports, especially to my family in Los Angeles. It was nice to kind of be in at something at the beginning and have something I felt was ours, and that we could actually create something that was different and really showcase the city and showcase who we are, plus support the team. And I really did kind of think it was just going to be something that was going to start off as being fun. Obviously, being part of the supporter culture is really important, and amplifying that is important. I didn't realize it was going to become as big as it has become. And I really love the people that are drawn to it. I think when people say it's a family, I mean, it really is a family. I think about all the different things people have gone through, all the support that's kind of come out of the woodwork. We listen to each other, where you can be a dysfunctional family at times, but we always seem to come out better at the other end, and we learn and we grow. I think that's important. And I feel like at the beginning of this year, we had so many great things that were kind of in the mix at the very beginning. And then COVID happened. And I don't want to feel like that's gone. I feel like right now we have time to ponder and sit and kind of work with it a little bit more. But it is important to me that we are now something that feels authentically from here, and that also is serious and focused on a sport that, quite frankly, a lot of people thought was never going to make it in Atlanta. Not when you got college football, not when you got baseball, not when you got, every NFL, basketball, like no one thought there was going to be a place for soccer. I'm thrilled that it's become, my dad watches it now. That's huge. So yeah, and I'm glad to feel like we are a part of that thing.
Yeah. So Reggie, you talked briefly about that, Footie Mob started putting you in some settings that, you had traditionally been in, mostly Black circles and communities. And this, brought you into some other air and meeting people you might not have met otherwise. Talk a little further about one, what that has looked like to you, but then, talk a little bit about, beyond just you being a member. I mean, you're a fairly recognizable voice of Footie Mob and Atlanta soccer, honestly. Talk about what that looks like.
Well, I will say this: for my adult life, I was in predominantly Black spaces, African American spaces, but as an Air Force kid and moving around, and so it was just the opposite growing up. So it wasn't such a culture shock to get into Footie Mob. I will say this though: this is one of the few places where it looks like what Atlanta is supposed to be, where everyone is celebrated, where everyone has a voice, where everyone is not tolerated, where people are celebrated. And that was very important to me because, you don't want to go to a place where you're simply tolerated and you don't have a voice, or your interests are not really paid attention to. And so for me, Footie Mob was like, I'm like, this is Atlanta. And, to meet people and everybody's open, everybody's warm and accepting. And that was just refreshing. Growing up, I didn't always feel that way, especially as an Air Force kid. Sometimes, you got used to being in different places for very short periods of time and then moving to somewhere else. So meeting people, learning people, I guess it became an acquired skill, learning how to interact and learn different cultures and languages. And so to me, again, going back to Footie Mob, it's nice to be someplace where I don't care who you are, you will feel accepted. You will have a good time and you won't feel so out of place. And that's to me what Atlanta should be. You shouldn't feel out of place no matter where you go. One of the things I found as an adult is when you move, you start knowing different parts of Atlanta. So you have a Black Atlanta, then you got the Buckhead Atlanta, you got the Buford Highway Atlanta, so you kind of start figuring out different parts of it. But see, when you come to a tailgate or when you come to a match, it's this, and it's wonderful. And that's what I really appreciated about being in Footie Mob, was that everyone has a voice, and that was very important to me. As far as being a recognizable face of Atlanta, or to be honest, I'm not. I don't think about it a lot of times. I'm just being me, and then people will ask to speak to me, or people will come up to me. I've had people from, I think it's Univision and other places. Like, it's just weird to me, to be honest, that someone would think that of me. It's a lot of fun, but I don't really focus much on how I fit into that. I'm just having a good time.
Yeah. I bring that up because for me, it is significant. And by significant, I mean, and you and I've had this conversation, I think last year, in that I'm really proud to be part of an organization in a place where you, Reggie, represent me and are my spokesperson. And, there's not been a lot of spaces probably in either of our lives where you have white dudes being led by and having as their vocal representation Black guys. And so to me, that's part of some of the unique things that are happening with Footie Mob. So you guys are making me think, I've said this, you guys have probably all heard me say this. I've said this to a lot of my friends when people ask me, about Footie Mob. And one of the things I tell people is that what's happening with Footie Mob represents the best of what the new Atlanta is becoming. And I say becoming because it recognizes we've got a lot of progress to make, and there's still things to do. There are still things that are messed up in the city. When I say that, I'm curious what that means to each of you. Curtis, what is that? How do you take that?
I mean, at the very base level, I take it as a compliment because, I mean, we want to be welcoming to absolutely everyone in this city. But like I said, when you dig deeper into it, sports are viewed as a microcosm of society and of a city. And I think one thing that MLS and specifically supporters groups can do is force the hand of the league so that each team can truly represent that community. Mm-hmm. For all the charitable acts you see from the NFL, from the NBA, and from Major League Baseball, I see more Atlanta United players actually out in the community. Sometimes it's not about the dollar. And I feel like with MLS and with Atlanta United, with the sport, there's already that ingrained in it. But as supporters groups, and specifically with Footie Mob, we want to try to pull them towards causes that are close to us. We want to try to get kids who haven't been to a game access to a game. We want to make sure that a drum line, which is something that's very Southern, very Atlanta, is a part of the overall experience for as many people as possible. We want to make sure that if you're from Beaufort Highway, Bankhead, Buckhead, East Point, Atlanta proper, that you can see yourself in this group, but also in the team that you've chosen that represents your city. And that's kind of what I take all that to mean.
Mm. Terri, what does that mean to you, this idea that Footie Mob represents the best of what the new Atlanta is becoming?
Well, to piggyback on something that Curtis said, I find that we're bringing in with us a lot of our experience with the city, and we're finding ways to broadcast that and showcase it, whether it's through DJs, whether it's through marching bands, whether it's through our artists, whether it's through, and that art can come in many different ways, whether it's TIFO banners, whether it's from anything that we sell. We try to make everything, the people that we have catering our tailgates are all local. So we're bringing with us all our past experiences, and then we're kind of saying, hey, listen, this is all the different shades of the city. All of it's right here. And I find that is actually what makes us kind of unique and different. And that's where you get a little bit of what's great about what Atlanta used to be, and definitely how we can be better going forward. It really does represent the best of old and new Atlanta. There's no doubt about that. And I hope that when people see what we're able to do, especially through the eyes of sport, we can't take that equation out of it at all, that it might become a model for other cities to do the same sort of thing. We can't think of soccer culture as being homogenous worldwide. It just does not work that way. And it shouldn't work that way. Especially in the United States, where we're so vastly different from one coast to the other. I think the only other group that's actually kind of tapped into that same idea of let's show you everything this place has to offer through sport might be LAFC. And I know we keep going on about them, but when we talk to them, they say we're modeling a lot of what you do. We're going to try to show as much as the different diversity within the city through our club because we see you guys doing it. So I don't want to say that we're pioneers. That's going to discount a lot of what other supporters groups have done before us. But I think what we're doing is something that people are looking at as a model for showcasing what's really great about where you're from. And I think that we've done a great job of highlighting the best of what's in Atlanta.
Reggie, does that idea ring true to you about Footie Mob representing kind of a new Atlanta, and maybe kind of your thoughts on the becoming part?
I pretty much agree with both Terri and Curtis in a sense that it really reminds me of something that Curtis said that really stuck out to me. And he said this years ago, I'm always talking about it. He said, if you come to an Atlanta United game, you should be able to close your eyes and know that you're in an Atlanta United game, that you're in Atlanta. There should be an indication. And I was like, wow, that's true. But then I flipped that. I should be able to open my eyes and look around and say, wow, I'm in Atlanta. This is Atlanta. And so it should be represented, whether it's the drumline, whether it's the DJs, regardless of what it is. Even if we were Kentucky or, for example, Nashville, each city should be able to embrace whatever its culture is, whatever its identity is. If it's bluegrass and blues or whatever it may be. One of the things that I laugh about is I hope one day that New Orleans gets a soccer team, gets a club, because I want to see the second line and I want to hear the music, because that's what makes your club in your particular city your club. You want to feel that it reflects you. And I think becoming New Atlanta, becoming this new idea of what Atlanta is, that means that now you're starting to see a real reflection of the city. That means the various cultures, whether it's La Doce, whether it's, you just go around. If you come to an Atlanta United game, period, just look around, especially like at the tailgates. It's Atlanta, and it's a perfect reflection of the city. And that's what I really like about what we're doing.
So, let's talk about this idea a little bit more about in order to talk about the new Atlanta, there is a sense of, we do know that there are still like real issues. There's real issues of inequality. We've got issues of gentrification. We obviously have problems now with our law enforcement. We've got traffic issues. You could go on and on. I'd kind of like to explore, how do we continue this progression into making Atlanta a better place for everyone? And so some of that's probably going to be thinking about some of what had been normal and saying, we don't want to go back to that. So I'm curious if you guys have some specific thoughts on, hey, let's not go back to that, and maybe what would be a vision going forward. Terri, any thoughts on kind of, what that might look like?
Well, just for a little bit from my perspective as an educator, and I think that's probably the place where I could speak with those authority, is we really have to look at how we deal with education, how education is very unequal across the city, how the resources are not well distributed, how we need to find ways to recruit new teachers. We need to train those teachers, especially when it comes to issues of race and inequality. There's a movement right now on Instagram called Black At. And if you look at the stories that are coming out of it from schools all over the nation, there are stories that are shocking, and we need to read those and reflect on those, especially in how we serve our students, particularly our Black students. I'm hoping that people start paying more attention to who they're voting for when it comes to the school boards. I know sometimes people don't pay attention to that sort of thing, but I will say this, especially with all that we've seen the past few weeks with the demonstrations and Black Lives Matter, the people that are leading are all kids. Like I've gone to a few rallies. My students are going to rallies. They're becoming involved. The white students are learning how to be good allies. People are educating themselves a lot more than, quite frankly, than what they're actually getting in a lot of schools for various reasons. And I'm hoping that once we come out of this, now that we're had time to, especially with online learning, we have had time to think about things, that we can start thinking about how we restructure our education system and how we can, these kids are hungry for people that are going to basically train them how to be leaders and how they can make a change. And I think that we need teachers and people in administration and people that are working in school boards that are willing to enable them to do that thing. So that's going to have to be a sea change with a lot of different levels of education, but that's what I'm hoping will come out of this. And one way we can improve the city in ways that we hope you'll see, years down the road when these children do become leaders.
Curtis, what does becoming a new Atlanta look like to you?
I think we're at a great point where, 2020 has been a dumpster fire, to put it politely. And I think that being forced to sit at home because of COVID-19, and now being forced to absorb the news and seeing all the protests. I think we are finally starting to try to figure out what the underpinnings of our society is, what roles that individuals, groups, governments, certain authorities have in our lives, and what effect we have on them. And I think that people are finally starting to question that. I mean, we do so many things because that's the way we've always done them. And when you have a culture in a country like America, where we don't have a 700-year to 1,000-year history plus, we have 400 years on this continent, 240-ish, 30-ish as a country, and there's not very much in common that bonds us outside of the institutions that we have. And so now we're at a point where the institutions are truly being forced to account to their people, and the people for whom it's always worked are seeing that, oh, wait, it really did not work. You've hit this critical mass. So I think that both locally and nationally, we have this moment to actually reflect on what it actually means to be a fully integrated member of this society. Seeing that what we have isn't working for everyone, and then trying to make it work and figure out what that means. I mean, there's the defund the police movement, which I've seen people argue over the name, but when you look at the substance of it, it's literally disruption, which if you call it disrupt the police, everybody in Silicon Valley will be throwing money at it. So we're, at this place where we can say, does this work? If it doesn't, why do we keep doing it? Why are we throwing money at this? Well, you've always heard people say, well, I pay taxes for this. Well, now we're actually going, well, where are my taxes actually going? Where are you getting it from? If they're writing tickets, where does that money go? Where does the permit money go? We're actually looking at the underpinnings of our society for the first time, probably since the 60s civil rights movement, with, a few peaks and valleys along the way, but it's a great time for us to finally do that. And I think it wouldn't have happened without this confluence of events.
Reggie, what does a new Atlanta look like to you?
The new Atlanta to me is about new accountability. For a lot of people in the African American community, we've been talking about police brutality, a lot of the inefficiencies, a lot of over policing. If you ask any of my friends, I don't care what their financial status, I don't care who they all have a story of being stopped or being a little bit concerned about whether or not they're going to make it for a routine traffic stop or something like that. Not to mention some of the other things, gerrymandering, some of the voter registration. I'll put it this way. These things have always been happening for years. And a lot of times it was swept under the rug, or people didn't believe you when you said this, or they felt you might have been overreacting when you mentioned that this happened or that happened. But now, one of the things that I'm noticing is that people are being held accountable from the top down. And so some of the things that used to be just, okay, this is how it's always been, people are saying, no, it's not going to be that way anymore. No, you're going to be held accountable. No, this will change. And it's not about changing people's minds anymore. And that's always been one of my things, is that I'm not trying to change your mind if you happen to be a racist. I'm not trying to change your mind, but I will hold you accountable. You are still going to respect me in a public space. You're still going, I should be able to still, go to different parts of town, buy a home in a certain neighborhood. There should be some accountability. And so that's what I'm starting to see now, is that the old Atlanta, people, there was no accountability. Some people did what they wanted, moved polling places and did different things, and there was no accountability. Even the issue with Governor Abrams. that really was a concern of mine, because that was proof that that was the old guard. That's how things were always done. But now there's a lot more of accountability, and I'm hoping the new Atlanta will start to show more accountability.
Yeah, so it seems to me, one of you guys, somebody mentioned something about talking about the civil rights era, and honestly, it's kind of, I've given a lot of thought lately, thinking we think of that as being an historical thing, and it is finally occurring to me, and maybe I'm just blind to it, and I'm finally opening up my eyes and seeing I'm not sure that it ever ended. And I think a lot of the things people were fighting for in the civil rights era, there's still progression. And so in some ways, I think we're just a continuation of a lot of those things. And you're right, it's around accountability. And I would say a lot about transparency and honesty as well, about, as a society, when we talk about, where's our money going for these things? And are we going to live by a rule of law for everyone? So, kind of the last question I'll ask, and we can't help but see that we're at a kind of a unique stage. And I think this goes way beyond COVID. And I think we're seeing a lot of stuff happening with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think it's becoming a movement that is very important, but that I think is maybe a tipping point. So I'm curious if you guys are seeing that there's kind of some potentially a tipping point, and where this could lead us as a society. And once again, we know that Atlanta did kind of have a somewhat of a central role in the civil rights era of the 60s. And I'm curious what you guys think about Atlanta's role in this particular moment in time. Curtis?
I mean, you're right. I mean, the civil rights movement never actually ended. I mean, you go from the Civil Rights Act to the Voting Rights Act, Housing Rights Acts, and then that sort of dovetails you straight into the LGBTQ movement, which started not too long after. Stonewall is 1969.
Yep.
And that's literally the year after the Voting Rights Act, or excuse me, Civil Rights Act. I mean, it's a constant, I don't want to say battle, but it's a constant struggle for citizens to be fully recognized by their government, by their institutions, to have all the full rights of being an American. I mean, my sister's 10 years older than me, and she's the first person in our family born with every inalienable right of an American. We think of these things as being so long ago, but they stopped overtly. They changed form. There's still application, not fraud, critiques of people's names. We go, oh, well, that name sounds a little ethnic. There's still realtors and lenders who won't show you certain neighborhoods. So I think you're right. It's a never-ending battle, but it takes moments like these where you can get everyone on your side, and you can say, while we have your attention on police brutality, let me show you unfair housing practices. Let me show you unfair lending practices. Let me show you, I mean, if you go to any lower income community, why is the best place to do your financial actions a grocery store or a corner store where you can pay your bills, send money? Why is it not a bank? And I think that's the things that people who are allies are starting to wake up to, is within the communities that you may stand shoulder to shoulder with at a game, when you go to your separate homes, you don't share a community anymore. It ceases, and it's two different worlds. And personally, I was torn. It was like, oh, there's video cameras, we can finally see it. But I was literally watching a documentary today. I mean, there's a video of the Watts riots. There's a video of Detroit riots. I mean, we've seen these things throughout time. And I think us as a whole having to sit here with COVID might have been the thing that made us all pay attention, because there's no games going. There's no movie coming out. If there's music coming out, you're not going to the concert. So I think that tipping point, you can't separate from the world as it exists, of people sitting at home. They've been there for 11 weeks. George Floyd is murdered. Breonna Taylor is murdered. Ahmaud Arbery is murdered. And it's all in rapid succession. And when you see those things, it's easy to go from that one community seeing this being outraged to larger communities becoming outraged as well, and going, oh no, this is happening. I have to focus on this. It's in the news constantly. And I mean, we're in an era where scandals come and go in 24 hours. And now this has been a sustained going on 4 weeks, which in modern American history is kind of amazing.
Terri, do you think we're at a tipping point?
I feel like we've been tipping for a while. It's just now, well, to put it in Orwellian terms, because that's what I'm going to do. In 1984, there's a point where and I'm going to totally butcher this, where he says because they have bars and football and pool, they're not paying attention to what's going on around them, right? And so at the end of the school year, I'm teaching 1984 to my kids. We're on Zoom, and all the distractions that they have aren't there. And I noticed, of course, whenever a ninth grader reads 1984, automatically they feel like they're the smartest person in the room, but now they're living it. And they're like, I'm paying attention to a lot more things now. And so the conversations I would have about the book were colored vastly differently than they've had in the 20 plus years I've taught that book. Because they're like, yeah, I don't have the distractions. I don't have these things around me. So it's like Curtis said, we've had to sit with COVID for 11 weeks now. We don't have the things around us that distract us like we normally do. The TV is on all the time. We're seeing all the things that have been happening. And yes, the Watts riots were videotaped. Yes, don't forget, Stonewall was a riot that was started over police overreach. As much as we want to try to color it as being a parade, it started as a riot that lasted 4 days. You can't deny what's going on anymore, and there's no way to really ignore it. So what I'm hoping, and what we're starting to see after the 2 weeks that we've had the demonstrations, is that people are starting to kind of think, okay, this is we've only seen a few weeks of this, but this has been going on for years, and there's no telling how much hasn't been broadcast. So I'm hoping the tipping point will be, obviously we keep talking about self-reflection. I think that's one of the big themes of all this is self-reflection. Do we come out? And I don't want to necessarily go back to what was normal. What was normal before wasn't great. I mean, there are things that we loved. I miss being around my friends. I miss, being able to sit down and have a beer on a patio and hug people and all that. I miss going to concerts, but there's a lot of things that just don't need to go back to normal anymore. And I'm hoping if there's anything that comes from this is that we think about kind of digging into that dirt and saying, okay, what can grow from this? There's seeds that are planted. What is sustainable? What can grow from this, and what needs to be weeded out? So that's kind of where I hope we come from here. So,
Reggie, thoughts?
I have a lot of feelings to go along with the thoughts. It has been overwhelming emotionally at times. It has been extremely traumatic at times. The videos, the watching someone die, it's traumatic. It's extremely traumatic. Having family members pass away from COVID. Since we've been home, I can count, there's more people than my fingers who I know, either family or friends, who have passed away from COVID. And so that was already traumatic. And then it used to be when when Trayvon was murdered, we went through a period where it was like maybe 6 months where it's the anger, the sadness, the fear, the frustration, and you work through it and you get yourself to a place where you say, okay, I'm okay now. You have to talk with your family. I have 2 sons who are adults now. At that time, they were teenagers. They were around his age. So you have that talk with your sons, and you call your family members and make sure they're all okay. And so after those 6 months, you go, okay, all right, okay, I'm good. But this time you find out, okay, Brianna, okay. Then you find out Ahmad. And then it's like, okay. And then you see him killed. And then you see George and you see him lose. And there is no 6 month recovery. It's just back to back to back. And you have to process that. You have to emotionally be there for your kids. You have to worry about yourself and your kids and your wife and just the feeling that I'm just not safe no matter what I do. That can be overwhelming. And that's something that I've been dealing with, and I'm grateful that people have been posting but it's at the end of the day, when you turn off the phone and you turn off the computer, you turn off your laptop, it's just you and your feelings and your thoughts and what you've just experienced or seen. I guess what I'm trying to say is the tipping point for me was when I saw an entire team of players, and that's Black, white, Latino, whomever, an entire team of players take a knee. I saw an entire team of players in different leagues all over this world, soccer, wearing Black Lives Matter shirt. And I'm a big Bournemouth supporter. That's my club, Terry. I'm a big Bournemouth supporter. And they put out a video, and this was something that the players decided to do. They put out a video speaking out against police brutality and how things need to change. These are the players. It wasn't a PR move. And then I look at New Zealand, and I look at Paris, and I look at London, and you just look around the world. And one of the things that people are saying is, wait a minute, this is happening in my community too, and it needs to stop. So to me, this is the tipping point, is that, again, as I mentioned before about accountability, I'm seeing more accountability. I'm seeing people now getting out of their comfort zone. People are stepping away from their brands. People are stepping away from what some of their family might think or say. And they're speaking out and they're saying, this is not right. I'm grateful for that. I'm hoping that moving forward, this doesn't stop, because right now, sometimes I see some performance, and that's just me, that's my observance. I see some performance and I doubt some of the sincerity sometimes. But my hope is that the genuine help, the genuine feelings, the genuine outrage that I see, I hope it continues, long beyond the typical news cycle.
Thank you, Reggie. We are at the end of our time. I'm really honored to have the three of you with me this evening. Appreciate your honesty, thoughtfulness. Most of all, I miss seeing each of you, and look forward to the time that we can get together again